how much better is this Dodger team than the one from last year?
Well, don't forget, too, they added some guy named Shohei Ohtani, who is just an offensive juggernaut. So, yeah, the Dodgers needed to improve. They got two stud starters. They got perhaps the biggest bat in all of baseball. So the Dodgers seem poised to win that National League West this year. But it's 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 a team that Phillies need to play and need to show that they can beat because if you want to win the World Series, you got to beat the good teams. And here's a really good test for them right now.
It is 58 wins for the Phillies, 55 for the Dodgers. They meet tonight. Both teams missing some pieces. Betts is out. Yamamoto not in the rotation right now. Walker Buehler came back, didn't pitch well, back hurt again. I'll ask you, Frank. We don't have the official news yet, but feeling on Schwarber, Harper, will we see them? It feels like Schwarber tonight. You think we see Schwarber and Harper in this series?
Well, I'm pretty sure Schwarber is coming back today. They haven't announced it yet, but that seems to be what's going to happen for Schwarber. Schwarber could be the DH, not play the field. I would think they won't use him in the field again because it was playing defense that caused him to get injured to begin with. And then Bryce Harper, I wouldn't be totally shocked if Harper came back tonight because he pushes really hard and he was running the other day pretty good. But I think for him to play in the All-Star game, he should sit out this series and next. And I think the All-Star game would be a really good time to come back if you're Harper.
We'll see when that lineup comes out if both of those guys are involved. And, of course, JT Realmuto, we think, could be back after the All-Star break. Frank Klose, 97.3 ESPN.com. Let's go to the mailbag. Ed and everybody else wants to know, what, if any, pieces do the Phillies need to add by the deadline? And who are some of the players that the Phillies legitimately would think about moving to accomplish that goal?
Well, I think once the Phillies are healthy, you're going to realize that the Phillies are pretty complete. Dave Dombrowski, at least publicly, has been saying he's got a large number of MVP type players who, when they're healthy, are going to play like MVP type players. So I don't think there's a lot of pressure to make a big splash. I don't necessarily see him going to get a big name in any way. But one thing that Dave Dombrowski has always been good at is finding those names that you don't necessarily expect ahead of time. And there is one name that kind of came out from USA Today's yesterday. We saw that Bob Nightingale reported that Brent Rooker is a name that could be one that the Phillies are looking at. And I think that's kind of the type of player you're going to see the Phillies go after. If you're not familiar with Rooker, he's an outfield bat. He's actually been on 4 teams already in his young career. He came up in 2020, but he had 30 home runs and was an all-star for the Athletics last year. Now, the Athletics are not going to have a ton of all-stars, so he might not have made it on a good team like the Phillies, but he is a kind of a power bat who bats right-handed who you can put into left field. That doesn't suggest then that the Phillies are looking at center fielders, meaning they might be satisfied with Brandon Marsh and Johan Rojas in center field and comfortable enough that they can go add a right-handed bat that could play left field. So I think if it's not Rooker, it might be somebody like Rooker. Now, Craig Mish, you might know that name. He's covered the Marlins for many years. He broke the JT Realmuto trade to the Phillies years ago. He suggests that the Marlins could trade Jazz Chisholm. And sounds like there's a lot of buzz about that. I don't necessarily see the Phillies going for a player like Jazz Chisholm, and the reason being it'll cost you one of your top prospects. And really, the Phillies don't necessarily need that type of superstar bat at this point. They kind of need the players that will fit the roles that they need. And right now, that might be a right-handed bat, someone who could play either left or center, but the center fielders are going to cost them more. And, while I am a big proponent of making the World Series, the veteran sportscaster Casey Stern always loves to say prospects are cool, parades are cooler. I do believe in that, that you want to get a championship above all else. But I think they can do so and then still be sustainable down the road. Now, pitching, I think there's always room to add pitching depth. I don't think they need to add a big-time starter, but, I think right now you're realizing that, the depth that the Phillies have might not be as good as you might expect, and you're still kind of a wild card with the two young guys that they brought up in Tyler Phillips and Michael Mercado. So I think that they would look towards the back end of the rotation, maybe.
I want to get your thoughts on, because to get some of these guys, you got to give up. Are there any guys, Frank, that you would be unwilling to move regardless?
I would try to stay away from trading Miller, and I think that you can stay away from trading Miller. Aiden Miller, they're kind of their top offensive prospect now. I mean, if he might even surpass Andrew Painter and be the top prospect when we see some of these prospect rankings sort of reset after the draft. But I don't think you need to trade somebody like him because I don't think they need the type of impact player that a lot of teams out there might be looking for. So I mentioned Jazz Chisholm, for example. A team like the Seattle Mariners is absolutely desperate for offense, and they're having a really good season in the AL West. Been in first place a lot of the season, so they need that bat desperately. I don't think the Phillies are in a position of desperation where they have to get a certain piece in order to compete for a World Series. So I don't think they need to trade those top prospects. I think that they can trade, maybe prospects 5 to 10 on their list and still get some good pieces. I mean, while I just went through that adage, product prospects are cool, parades are cooler. Well, a lot of teams are perhaps overvaluing prospects lately and too afraid to trade them. So that's kind of meant that second tier players or second tier prospects are netting you something at the trade deadline. So I think they can kind of fill their holes and get some really good complementary pieces without having to give up one of the top prospects. Now, would I, if it was me, would I trade a Justin Crawford? I might. It depends on the type of player that you're getting back. A lot of these players might be rental players. If you're looking at a rental, you don't want to trade any of your top prospects. If you're looking at somebody who's going to be around for a few years, well, then you might feel more comfortable trading a Crawford. But I tend to believe now, after following Dave Dombrowski for a few years now closely, the names that he's going to get, we probably haven't heard of yet. And I would say, too, we probably haven't heard of a Rooker before now. And one of the reasons why he finds that value is that he doesn't give up a lot for the big, sexy names these days.
Frank Klose, 97.3 ESPN.com. His Phillies mailbag has a bunch of questions about improving this team. Everybody wants to win the World Series. Greg wants to know, do they have enough starting pitching to navigate injuries the rest of the way? Or do they need another guy like a Joe Blanton type? And I'll add to that, the Phillies jumped out to this great start, due in large part to an unbelievable first half from two guys that probably you didn't envision happening. Ranger Suarez and Christopher Sanchez. And you can even throw in like a Matt Strahm and Jeff Hoffman, I think exceeded expectations. Can you anticipate that those guys are going to do what they did in the first half in the second half, or do you think they might need to look for more pitching?
I don't think they need to go too big on this. Now, the big, we've talked about Taiwan Walker perhaps way too much for a weekly radio segment, right? But I think once he's healthy, the rotation is stable enough. I mean, I realize that when you're in a rotation with all stars and pitchers of the month, that's going to look pretty bad, right? If you're Taiwan Walker with what he gives you, but what he does give you is 5 innings every single time, and then you don't kill the bullpen, and that allows the Stroms and Hoffmans to have those above average and above expectation seasons that you're having. So to me, it's a big trickle down effect. If you don't get those innings from your fifth spot in your rotation, that's where you're probably first going to put a strain on the bullpen. And then if a guy has a bad day, and it's going to happen. I mean, Ranger Suarez had a couple lately, and even Nola, right? If you go the bullpen a little early, a couple days in a row, some teams really feel that crunch, and the Phillies have been able to avoid that so far. So I think for now, the nice thing about that fifth spot in the rotation is they got a little bit of a break here. And they're going to go with Michael Mercado, at least for now, to quote Rob Thompson, on Sunday against the Oakland Athletics. And then it's the All-Star break. And then you have up until as far as, depending on what happens, because Zach Wheeler is going to pitch Sunday and not in the All-Star game, you might not need a fifth starter until the 23rd or 24th of July. So that gives the Phillies a couple weeks basically to see how Taiwan Walker's coming around. The little spot on his arm was really messing with his arsenal of pitches, right? So if he can't throw that cutter that he's so good at throwing when his splitter, excuse me, when he's having that success, they just figured we'll let this heel shut it down, and then maybe also at the same time try to rebuild his velocity. So if by the 23rd, 24th, it's kind of clear, all right, Walker isn't really coming along, they probably should try to get some depth of some kind. And when I say depth, it doesn't necessarily need to be the big sexy name. It might not even need to be a Blanton-ish name. I mean, Blanton was a pretty established starter at the time, but they want to make sure that they just don't kill the bullpen. And so I think that's what Walker was able to successfully do, if not pitch as well as the others. But you want to keep that bullpen fresh because when you get to the end of the year, when the fifth starter doesn't even pitch, you want to have a fresh bullpen and you don't even need to worry about that spot in the rotation. And if you think about it, if you go down the rest of the season, once you get past the All-Star break, you're looking at what, maybe 14 starts out of that fifth spot going forward. So you just want to have some depth. You don't necessarily, it might not even need to be a major leaguer, but it is fair to say all the depth that the Phillies had at the minor leagues, you're seeing the best of it in Mercado and Phillips. I mean, you go down a long list of names that have not worked out this year. Mick Abel has not given them anything at AAA. Colby Allard was signed to be starter depth. He's not giving them anything. Max Castillo gave up 7 runs today. Is in the rotation in Lehigh Valley. Ricardo Pinto, David Buchanan. You can keep on going down the list. Nick Nelson never reclaimed a starting spot this year. So even if it's AAA depth, I would see what you could do to get somebody there just in case. And in the meantime, you might have a couple more starts out of Mercado and or Phillips to see if they can hang around for a while too.
Frank, another interesting question in the mailbag from Vince. He wants to know, when JT comes back, who goes?
Well, I think Rafael Marchand has been really strong. He was kind of a wild card. He spent most of the year injured up until the time that he was reactivated and then quickly on the major league club. I think he's shown a lot of promise. I really like his arm. I really like some of the power you've seen out of Rafael Marchand. That all said, I think he's going to be the one that goes to AAA when JT Realmuto comes back. And if you look at some of the starts, Christopher Sanchez's big start after his contract, right? The complete game shutout. It was Garrett Stubbs behind the plate. So you have a really good receiver there. And it's also been kind of nice too for Stubbs in that he's getting some more at bats. And if you look at his last 7 games, he's batting .278. And now that's like 100 points better than he was for a while there in the season. So I think what you're going to see with the Phillies, Stubbs regains that backup catcher role. Marchand will probably go down to AAA, and if all's healthy, he'll probably be back as a September call-up. And long term, I think you'll see Marchand as the backup, like as in next year, because he could play a lot more than backup catchers for Realmuto have over the years. And then who knows if he's good enough? Maybe he succeeds Realmuto someday. But I think for right now, you stick with Stubbs. He's been very good behind the plate. His bat's picking up a little bit. Bring Marchand back in September, and then next year you might reconfigure. But I don't think they're going to mix that up there just yet.
One thing we talked about yesterday, I want to get your take on is, would you consider moving Brandon Marsh to upgrade your outfield?
If I were going to do that, I would not do it during the season. And the reason why I wouldn't do that is I am a big believer in the team chemistry. And look, this Phillies clubhouse in terms of players liking each other and playing well together, that's a very strong clubhouse. And I've heard that from a lot of people, even around the league, right? They're a unit. They're a team in the truest sense of the word team.
Oh, listen,
I don't want to mess up with any of those key players.
We kick this back and forth and kind of agree. It's like, if he's not going to play every day, you almost have to consider upgrading, but I can't take him out of that clubhouse and what he means.
Yeah, and let's be honest, he's hitting 3.0. I haven't checked the numbers lately, but last I looked, he was batting 308 against right-handed pitching. So he's kind of a platoon player, and platoon players have a role in a team like this. So if you go down the stretch and you're not comfortable playing him against lefties, then you platoon him with a Rojas, and then you get somebody who can start in left field. I think that's going to be where he's finding success. I don't see that, as I was just saying, I don't see them getting a starting center fielder at this trade deadline. So I think he's going to be a platoon player in center field. I think that's kind of where he's going to be at, and I don't know if now is the time, especially as you're trying to win a championship, that's the time you're going to mess up the platoon or try to break the platoon and see if you can get them to hit lefties better. that might not happen this season, but he's pretty good against righties. I think he's worth keeping around no matter what, even if he ends up being a platoon player.
Frank Klose, 97.3 ESPN.com. The mailbag every Tuesday right here on the Sports Bash. And the